Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're finally getting on to stripping down the Mini. Now, the Mini journey, it hasn't exactly been a straight line. It started with an impulse buy. We then found out the engine was really badly built, so that had to get sorted. And then I enjoyed an entire week of it, where I will say, I see why you guys love them as much as you do. However, that ended in a rather spectacular dive almost into a lock, which since that point, the Mini has sat here feeling a bit sorry for itself, with one exception, which was a visit to the MOT station. Now, for you guys looking at this video from abroad, an MOT is what we need to keep these cars on the road legally, and it lets us know the cars are safe as well. Unfortunately, if you jump into my last video, I'll leave a description around here somewhere, this car failed on it on a number of points, one of which was the rear subframe mounts. So rather than poke around under the car and try and figure out what to do, today we are going to strip the rear of the vehicle completely. We're going to remove the rear subframe, have a look to see what welding needs doing, and potentially see what other parts we're going to need to buy to get that rear back end back in one piece and as good as new. Let's get into it. First things first, and we're just going to get the Mini moved around a bit so we've got loads of room around it. I've got a feeling once we start tearing this apart, it's not going to be moving for a fair few weeks. Now, a rather large part of getting the back end of this Mini sorted out is going to be looking at the rear floor of the boot. Now, the reason for that is when I bought this, I did see a couple of holes, but since then I have poked around and there are more than just a couple of holes. We've got holes where the spare wheel should be. No, we've got holes near the rear wheel arches, and we've got a couple of points around the battery box. All of these are going to need looking at once we've got the back of this car up in the air and the rear subframe off. Literally all I have done so far is remove the rear deck lid and the bumper, and I have already snapped 2 bolts. This job is not filling me with confidence so far. How many more do you think I'm going to break before getting that rear subframe off? I am worried about this. So, in an effort to actually be organised for once, I have written down a list of things that I think I'm going to need to do to get this subframe off. Well, once we've got it in the air. Now, in a very particular order, we're going to start with rear wheels. So, rear wheels off. After we've got the rear wheels off, we've got to disconnect the exhaust. Then we're going to need to drain the fuel tank and remove the fuel tank. Now, one reason I'd really like to do that is because I don't want to go viral for welding the back of a car with a fuel tank in it and, I don't know, blowing myself up. So, pretty important step there. After that, we're going to remove the brake lines. We'll probably also need to have a look at the brake lines, see if they're corroded, see if they need replacing. That's something we might need to do. Same with the shock absorbers. They'll need to come out and we'll see how they're looking. Now, at the moment, I don't really want to spend any money that I don't have. So if they're good enough, we'll put those back in. After that, we're going to move on to the radius arms. Again, radius arms have bushes and there's a high chance that they will be knackered. So I'll have to consider whether I'm going to put in original rubber or polyurethane. What have you guys done? Let me know what the best thing is. I've heard polyurethane obviously is very hard wearing, but it also gives a harder ride. So which way should I go? After that, we're going to support the subframe, get something underneath there. And the last thing on that big list of things to do to actually get the subframe out is going to be removing the subframe bolts. Bolts inevitably snap. Now, I do have myself, what's it called? The tools for putting in, I can re-thread if I need to on a slightly bigger bolt size. I'm hoping I don't need to go down that route. We can throw on some WD-40, we can heat the area, we can do all the little tricks to make sure we get that subframe off and see what it's going to look like. Whilst the car's still on all four wheels, I'm just loosening off the rear nuts so that when the car goes up in the air, it's a lot easier to get them off. So I've got the back of the car up and I'm struggling to find anything where I feel confident I could put a jack stand. The sills need replacing, so that's going to be another job down the line. For now, it's on the jack stand still, but I think that the best idea will maybe be getting some really strong wood and just bracing across the entire car. So I think I'll look at something like that for now, so I can actually start working on taking things off the back of this. Right, so we have finally got the car secured, which I didn't think would be such a massive job, but rotten sills and partly rotten floors have meant that we've had to come up with a little bit more of a creative solution to our problem. So we've used our mini ramps and we've got some really big wood spanning the vehicle with a couple of smaller bits on there as well. That means I can now work on the back of the vehicle without having to worry about how it's supported, if it's going to move. That is super solid. So a great place to put your tyres is underneath the car if you're working on it. It just keeps them from getting damaged, but it also means if anything does fail, it's just one extra layer of protection that means the car isn't going to fall on you if you're underneath there. So yeah, let's get those under there and put these bolts, these nuts in a safe place. One thing I'm realizing I should have checked quickly before I took the wheels off was for play in the radius arm, and I can still do it with just the hub. I'm guessing these probably haven't been done for 15, 16 years. I mean, the condition of the rubber is bad, so yeah, I think new bushes and just refurb the radius arms when they come off, but this is the time that needed to, yeah, I can feel a good couple of mil of play in there at least, so that's another job on the list for when everything is off. Next up on the list is removing the exhaust. Now this is relatively simple. It's a few nuts and you generally are going to sit on the back of the car and have a little bit of a wrestle until it comes loose. Once that was out of the way, I then turned my attention to the shocks. Now, shocks again are fairly easy. When you get that top nut loose, you want to make sure you're holding the top of the shock, reach around into the wheel well and hold that so that it's not rotating and that top nut will come out fairly easily. After that, it's just the bottom two nuts. So as we've been going along the job, I'm getting a much better idea of how everything is attached on the back of this vehicle. And one thing as a complete beginner when I went to look at this car is, yeah, I saw holes in the boot, but if I'd known what I would know now, I understand why this failed on the MOT for the rear of the car. So let me just turn the camera around and show you. There you go. So you see these bolts here? Right, they hold the back of the subframe on as far as I can tell, and you've got this little bracket here, right? So yeah, we've got some corrosion on that side. If we look at the other side, now this is a completely different story. On this side, if we have a look, we have one bolt that seems to be hanging on for dear life, but on the other side, this has just been really badly patched, and given the lines on the top of that, I've got a really bad feeling that is fiberglassed. So I guess what I'm trying to say, if you go all the way back to me buying this car and what I was told about it in terms of there's a couple of bubbles in terms of rust, and the fact that the same people had owned this for 17 years, there's absolutely no way you wouldn't know that you would fiberglass places which are structurally dangerous. I think it's fair to say our little Mini is feeling rather sorry for himself. And yeah, there are definitely some really bad mistakes I made when buying this car. But on the plus side, I'm going to learn a lot of new skills. The suspension's kind of dropped down. I have been able to pull off these parts. So I think this is part of that famous Mini suspension everyone chats about, which I honestly know nothing about yet. But anyway, held together literally, I guess, just under the pressure of the car. Now, one thing I noticed is when I pulled this apart, this bit goes into this bit, and it was just sat like that. There is a thread in there, and there is no thread in there. Is there meant to be something on the back of this that is tying that in? Because at the moment, nothing is. That is just part of the suspension and it just pops on. Let me know. Am I missing something? Next up on the list was removing the fuel tank. Now, again, a job I've never done before, and you'll notice I clamped the breather pipe because I'm a bit of a bell end sometimes. However, better safe than sorry. The job was fairly straightforward, except I tried to use a new tool that I've got to draw the fuel out of the tank, and it just wouldn't work. In the end, we gave up on that one and decided to just pour the fuel into a canister. Dumb idea, probably, but it got the job done. Next, we were on to the handbrake, and I started by getting into the cab and loosening the wire by the lever. Once I'd done that, I jumped onto the back of the vehicle, and there were a couple of split pins to pull, and I was able to loosen off both handbrake cables on either drum. Things going all right, and we're about 7 hours into it, 6 hours into it, so not the worst considering I've never done this before. I'm really glad we stopped when we did on Friday. One, because I was tired, but two, we're now on Sunday, so it gave me a good day to think about how I want to tackle the rest of this job. The rear of the car is now at a point with us removing a lot of the auxiliaries that we're going to be tackling actually removing the rear subframe. And one thing I've learned from previous smaller jobs that I've done is if I go into those bolts just hoping they don't snap, inevitably half the time they do. So whilst the bolts are still in one piece, what I'm going to do is put some heat through them, and I'm also going to get some WD-40 on there. Now, neither of those things are massively groundbreaking in terms of new techniques for getting bolts out. But one really interesting thing that I saw quite recently is heating the bolts, and then whilst they're red hot is actually spraying the WD-40 on. What happens in that situation is the bolts will rapidly cool, and at the same time they're going to pull in the WD-40 further down the thread. So you're not just relying on the thread to get soaked naturally, you're using that heat to create a vacuum to pull that in, which should hopefully, fingers crossed, mean that we can get these bolts out a little bit easier. This was involved in a bit of a crash, and this has all been fiberglass. So down on the cheap, it's something I might have done myself. And if it was the only issue, it wouldn't be an issue. But as we're tearing this back as much as we are, I think we'll remove the rear arches. And let me show you this. Here we have the rear sill, and the back corner's gone, and that is sitting just in front of where we're going to remove the bolt. So I think I'm going to pull off some of this rusty. Look at that. Look at that. So all that's going to come off. This was a particularly bad corner, but this will all get fixed. But for now, I'm going to stop picking at that and put some heat on these bolts. Now I've got a feeling I'm going to become a bit of a good welder by the end of this project. So if you're interested in seeing how we get on with the Mini, I'm going to be running a full series on the restoration of this car. So hit subscribe and let's keep going. Right, that's 3 of the 4 bolts removed from the rear of the subframe, and that process that I'm using really seems to be paying off. So I'm starting with heating the bolt until they're cherry red and then spraying the lubricant on. By doing that, the lubricant is getting pulled down the thread, which means it's getting more lubricated. Once we've done that, we're giving it a bit of a tap with a hammer, and then we turn to the fun tools. I picked up this Milwaukee impact driver, which is an absolute dream. But when I jump onto using this, I'm not going for the hardest setting to start with. I start on 1, increase the settings until the bolt comes loose. Now I've got 1 bolt left to do. Let's see how lucky I am. Well, would you look at that? All 4 bolts out, but I tell you one thing, I am going to replace these because they're not looking too sharp, like basically the whole of the rear of the car. So I'm going to add that to my little shopping list. So one small hangover I've actually got from my old workshop is the bottom of my workbench. Now, the reason why I kept this was actually for moving my roof tents and also the compressor, because that weighs an absolute ton. But for today, this is going to be absolutely perfect for getting under the rear subframe so we can support it for removing it. Now, we're at the point where the subframe is, I think, fully removed from the back of the vehicle. And I've not tried actually pulling this away. So this is 2 days worth of work. And I think we are now at a point where, would you look at that? Watch out, puppy. We have 1 fully removed subframe from the vehicle. What a job. We have finally got the rear subframe off the car, which is what I wanted to do this week. It's taken me a couple of days. And to be honest, because I've never done this before, I'm super happy with that. We've not snapped any bolts. We've had issues to deal with. We've found more rust, more problems. But by doing it this way and taking the back of that car off, we can really look at everything that needs to be addressed. So not only will we be probably rebuilding the rear subframe and refurbishing it, we'll be looking at the welding in the boot area, perhaps what panels we need to replace or just welds that we can put in to get things fixed so it's structurally safe. As well as that, we've got to look at maybe doing some cheeky upgrades. We'll have to have a look at the shock absorbers and other components on the back of the car. So that is all coming next week. If you've enjoyed this video as much as I've enjoyed making it, please subscribe, like this video, give me a comment, let me know what else you want to see, because I love speaking to you guys and you also teach me a lot as well. So thank you for that. Anyway, for now, we're going to get packed up. I'm going to stare at this job that I've been doing for quite a while because I am loving seeing this moving along. And that's it. I'm going to leave you. I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to go home and have some dinner. Take care. Bye, guys.